It turns out that lawyers, and by the way, what I'm going to do is talk for maybe 20 or so minutes. I'll stop sooner if you start nodding off. And then what I hope happens is that fairly soon into my comments, you'll start thinking about things that will cause you to have a question or two, or maybe challenge things that I have to say. That's perfectly fine. That's a lot more interesting to me than to hear my own voice. It turns out that lawyers lead a lot of contests that no one wants to win. We are among the most clinically depressed profession. We lead in categories like substance abuse and alcoholism, and in distress generally. And when you say that to people, when I say that to people, it generates some interesting responses. One response I get is, "Good, you deserve it." And then the next thing you know, I'm hearing the modern day version of Shakespeare's line in Henry VI. First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers, and we just go from there. A second response that I sometimes get when I tell people these, really unfortunate facts about lawyers and their psychological state is the endless stream of lawyer jokes. Oh, well, of course. How can you tell a lawyer's about to lie? Well, his lips start moving. Why is it that sharks never bite lawyers? Professional courtesy. Or the interview that the corporate board has for the next CEO. And it's an accountant, it's a business person, and it's a lawyer, who are the final three candidates. And they go through each of them individually. The board interviews each of them individually, and they ask the accountant the last question: how much is 2 + 2? And the accountant says, 4. They ask the business person, go through the same regimen of questions: how much is 2 + 2? Business person says, 4. And then, of course, they come to the lawyer, who's the last candidate for the job. How much is 2 + 2? The lawyer stands up, walks around, draws the blinds, dims the lights, and says, how much do you want it to be? Then there's a third category of response that has to do with a very personal reaction to it. And those are lawyers who say, yeah, you know what, I am one of those people. Or maybe a spouse is one of those people. Or even worse, an adult child is one of those people. And when it gets personal, when the psychological distress gets personal, then we care. But I would suggest to you that we ought to care sooner than that. And the reason we ought to care sooner than that, and one of the reasons, as we'll discuss when I get to some of the reasons that I wrote the book, is that what has happened in the legal profession over the last 25 years is a slice of what's wrong with America. It's a slice of what has happened throughout our culture. And let me tell you what I mean by that, and then I'll tell you what kind of led me to write the book and give you a sense of the guts of it. We as a culture have developed an obsession with short-term thinking. That's the first step in the problem. What matters is today's stock price. What matters is the current year's profits. What matters, if you're, as we'll talk about, if you're a law school dean, is this year's U.S. News and World Report law school ranking. We're obsessed, and it's not unique to the legal profession but at all. And as you read The Lawyer Bubble, or as you listen to what I have to say and think about the things that happen in your own careers and in your own occupations and in your own lives, you'll probably find yourself nodding along. Yeah, that rings true. There is a preoccupation with short-termism that is unfortunately crowding out things that matter in the long term. What flows from that is the second problem, and that is what we've developed, again, as a culture, as a society, is a myopic focus on a short-term metric that maximizes the result. So what are the metrics? What can I measure that will allow me to determine that I'm on the right path to maximizing whatever the short-term result is? But the problem, again, and this leads to the third problem. The problem, again, is that what you wind up doing when you do that is you exclude things that matter. What you can't measure gets lost in the equation. But just because you can't measure it doesn't mean that it's not important. What's the metric? Tell me what the metric is for the collegiality of an institution, whether it's a law firm or a hospital or a medical practice or an institution of higher education. What's the metric that allows you to assess something like the long-term stability of an institution? That's sort of the global problem. So the question is, what does that have to do with this book, and how did the book come about, and what, if anything, does the book have to say? I noticed, by the way, that the ceiling is raining on my chair. But not on the books. It's okay. Yep. We'll come to that. We'll come to that. I wrote the book, and let me do a couple of things. Let me tell you what led me to write the book, because what I just described to you is a phenomenon that will echo as I go through some of the specific things that emerge as part of what I think ails the legal profession as a microcosm of a much broader social problem. And the one thing that you'll notice as I go through is that the failure to take into account longer-term values, longer-term considerations, things that matter beyond this year's current profits or this year's current ranking or this year's whatever. The people who are going to feel and are already feeling the worst effects of that are the next generation. And there's an irony in that, because every time you hear about, oh, we're doing these terrible things to the next generation, the fact of the matter is we are doing terrible things to the next generation. But what's happening as a result of this myopia that focuses on short-term at the expense of long-term is wreaking true havoc on the next generation. And there's an intergenerational antagonism that pervades all of this that will come through loud and clear. And you'll see what I mean as we talk about the two major sections of the book. I started to write this book because the current provost at Northwestern was then dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dan Linzer, a good friend, came up to me one day and he said, "Why don't you do a linkage seminar for our undergraduates?" I'd been teaching at the law school a trial practice course for many years. It was a skills-oriented class, not anything that was sort of loosey-goosey humanities, touchy-feely stuff. And I said, well, what's a linkage seminar? It sounds interesting. A linkage seminar at Northwestern was the sort of thing that was designed to bring practicing real people, as opposed to, I guess, academics, into the classroom and then give students a concrete way to think about their own lives in the context of things that they might want to do for a living. And a lawyer was a natural thing. There are lots of undergraduates. Pre-law is one of the most popular undergraduate majors in the country. It has been for a long time, and it still is. And I said, well, that's fine. But what would I teach? And he said, perhaps, I haven't asked him, but perhaps to his great regret, whatever you want. So I had been puzzling about the problems of attorneys' psychological distress for about 8 or 10 years prior to that. And I always have to qualify this by saying I'm the exception. 6 out of 10 lawyers who have been practicing more than 10 years affirmatively counsel young people to stay away from law school. They say stay away. 6 out of 10, which is a terrible, terrible reflection, I think, on the profession. But I'm one of the 4. I had a great career in the law. I loved what I did, and so I come at all of this from a very positive perspective in a very positive place. And so I said, okay, well, I've been worried and concerned about what I had perceived myself over the prior 8 or 10 years as this increasing difficulty among many lawyers to maintain balance, to be able to live lives that allowed them to, for example, see their kids at night for dinner, to be able to do what I did, which was coach all of my kids' little league and girls softball teams. And those things were difficult when I was coming up through the big firm that I wound up spending 30 years at. Today, I think they may be impossible at most places. So I decided that one of the things that contributed to attorney unhappiness was a disconnect between expectations and reality. People grow up thinking that Being a lawyer means they're going to be Alicia Florrick in an episode of The Good Wife. They're going to do the winning cross-examination at the end of the episode, win the case for the